started on the same time. Lord, I do want to just lift up the rest of our time this morning together. And I praise and worship you for being the absolute perfect teacher. And I pray that we could be more and more like you as we lead our groups and meet people in various situations that we have. And I do pray just that this material would be very practical and very helpful to all the group leaders and in other aspects of our life. We want to deeply impact people. I pray this would help move us toward that end. Pray, just thank you so much for each person here and how much, gosh, I can't even imagine the work that's represented in this room. Just ask your blessings on this time. Pray in your name. Amen. Amen. Well, I truly am super excited to be teaching on this topic. I love human resource development. I love thinking about how do you help another person really grasp a concept. There's so many different strategies that you can use. How do you help a person grow spiritually? All these different questions. I have given a lot of thought, actually, to that. I have an undergrad degree in education, a master's in counseling, and then until I met my illustrious husband, I was a corporate trainer for about 25 years. So I spent a lot of time teaching soft skills. So I'm teaching managers how to persuade, how to confront, all the skills that you really do use in a small group. And I feel like that experience has helped me a lot in terms of how to facilitate small groups and Bible studies in that setting. But I have to say, especially after the small group that Reed and I are leading right now, that I feel truly like a total novice. We get in the car sometimes and look at each other, and seriously, it's like, what was that? Fiasco in terms of how my questions did not lead to the great impact that I was hoping to. So there's always room for improvement, and always with personalities and situations, there's no two things alike. And so I love the dynamics of leading a small group and the challenge of that. And I know from personal experience that small group can change your life, and that truth in the context of a relationship is, as Jim said, really the most powerful vehicle that there is for really doing that. Think to yourself in your Christian life, who has made the biggest difference in your life? And as I think through that list, it is Susie Fisher, Betty Westbrook, Larry Crabb, not as a teacher but as a person, and Ray Siegler. They're not John Piper or Spurgeon. Really the people that made a difference in my life practically, deeply, powerfully, are people like you and me that were willing to pay attention to me and attend to me. And I'm going to actually contact her through Facebook. Susie Fisher, when I was 21 years old in 1979, she just sat down with me and said, what is your vision for your life? And I told her at 21, I'm just going to get married and have kids, and maybe I'll teach a Bible study someday, senior in college. And she said, well, why not think about teaching a Bible study now? And God provided two people. I had such gratification from helping these two other people through simple Bible studies. I became a young life leader. From becoming a young life leader, I went to seminary. And from there, I've spent my life teaching Bible studies pretty much. One conversation truly did change the course of my life. I had no vision for that until that simple conversation. And so I hope as you lead small groups, you have that lofty goal to really impact people's life. And I love Stephen Covey. His 7 habits and all that actually are very good. And one of them is begin with the ending in mind. So I see a few nods there. And one of begin with the ending in mind. So think about your retirement party as a small group leader. what would give you joy to hear? Isn't it, I learned how to walk by faith. I learned whatever. I grew as a Christian. This group changed my life. Isn't that what you really would like to hear? That takes a lot of skill to achieve. And we're just going to talk about one skill this morning, but it's a huge one because we're talking about interaction. Small groups are experiential. And so you want this high quality learning, high quality fellowship. How are you going to achieve that? It's going to have to be through high quality questions that guide the group. And that's what we're going to focus on this morning. I think leading a small group takes a ton of skills. It is so much harder than public speaking or writing. Because as Jim pointed out, you have to be a teacher, a motivator, a counselor, an administrator. It really covers the gamut. And so again, I hope that this will really give you a sense of a greater handle on how you can get to that goal that you want to have. So I'm going to take a quick survey. Just raise your hands because I really want to understand a little bit more about the situations that you're facing, but I want to watch our time too. So some groups kind of focus more on fellowship, and I think in our church that's probably where the need is. We're not able to apply what we're hearing in Sunday school, Sunday morning and Wednesday night, so why have more, teaching? So fellowship is great, but then others are study oriented. So how many of you would say your group is more fellowship focused emphasis? Oh, okay, interesting. I thought that would be the majority. I didn't realize that. How many of you are more of a study type of group? Okay, so that would be that.
Yeah.
How many of you would say your challenge is people are talkative and you've got to rein things in to stay on task versus hard to get people to participate and you have those awkward silences and stuff like that?
I think there's certain people I really want to be in that. I want them to be more talkative.
Okay.
There's
Yes.
certain
And that's
people I would
the
love to hear from them and have more
real
involvement.
challenge.
Yeah.
Like of our current group, we have some people that will answer every question, and that kind of crowds out the people that are more reserved and things like that. Okay. And how many of you are studying a book? Oh, okay. How many are studying video series? Those were real big for a while with all the small groups. Nobody? Okay. Study guides with homework, question, fill in the blank, something like that. Okay. And then how many are really have people doing homework and coming back talking about their homework? Nobody. All right.
For a little while, and we're transit our old group.
Okay, all right. You know what, I think for the sake of time, I'm going to skip. I was going to have you also say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the quality of your discussions? I feel like I got a good feel for that from Jim's introductions. And then in one sentence, which we won't take time to do either, a major concern or area of improvement, and I think we heard those two in Jim's session. So, elements of an effective lesson plan, which is the first part of my notes in your syllabuses. This is something that is more than just asking questions, but I thought I'd just read it through real quickly to give you some help as you plan. Number 1, have an objective, ideally a single point for application. Change does happen slowly, and if you really want to change a person's life, you can't do a broad stroke. Better to cover one fruit of the Spirit well than all of the fruit of the Spirit quickly. And so I really think reducing down your goal is going to make you more effective. Generate curiosity and excitement about the topic in your introduction, and you can read more about that. But basically, you have to think about, what do people need? What is their emotional situation right now, and how do I connect what I'm teaching into that need? And then you'll have their interest. They'll want to hear what you're saying. Introductions are super important to give people a thirst to hear what you're going to say next. You want to create that. Plan questions in advance. Do you give yourself in your preparation time for the questions you're going to ask, not what you want to teach in terms of content? That really takes more time if you're going to do a good job on your questions. And here are the questions to ask yourself. How can I draw out the information I want to convey? I'm going to teach something, but how can I get that lesson out through asking good questions? That is a real challenge. How can I foster discovery learning, which I'll explain a little bit more about, through asking good critical thinking questions, which will guide my listeners to figure out for themselves the point that I want to make. That's powerful learning. How can I foster greater self-awareness through thought-provoking questions? How can I facilitate personal ownership through asking questions rather than telling? When a person comes up with it themselves and it's their thought and their idea and their insight, they have ownership of it. If you're just lecturing, that doesn't happen at all. How can I incorporate appropriate self-disclosure? And here is where there's so much potential for true sharing of lives if you model that first, as Jim already pointed out. And we have a difficulty or a challenge in that, and so far as I know, except for Diana's groups, they're all mixed. And so it's not appropriate to share some of our deeper struggles in a mixed crowd of children running out. So I've thought about in our group dividing the men and women up and going to separate places where then some deeper sharing can happen. So that, again, is something to think about in the challenge of wanting that. Incorporate metaphors, analogies, and illustrations. That would be a great half-day workshop, and Jesus was the master of that, and we need to understand why. Be creative. I love music, quotes, all those kinds of things. Those are very impactful to people. And in bold, at the bottom of the page, provide an opportunity when you're in small group for people to respond to God, when you have that optimal attention and emotional connection to your topic, and then help them plan for how they're going to apply what you talked about in the week ahead. And of course, that's the goal of your whole being there, is to change people's lives. And if you don't take that application step, a lot of times, you know how it is. You walk out the door and the next day, you never think again about what happened the day before. So, just again, those are all things, that's my checklist when I do a lesson plan, try to have all these things. In terms of questions, I love this phrase, the goal of good questions. I can get you to lead me where I want to go. So I want, and I'm going to illustrate this next if this doesn't make sense. I want you to understand James 1, 2, 3, 4. How can I get you to explain James 1, 2, 3, 4 to me? By asking you questions from the text. I want to know how you're doing. I want to know what you're struggling with. I can get you to tell me, to get me where I want to go through asking you the right questions. And so it's so much more powerful going at it that way. I want to generate everything I possibly can from the group and say the least as I can. And then it's so much more interactive and powerful. And in our situation, I look at the groups I've led, and there are people in the group that know more than I do. So it's not that hard to do. Or someone in the group knows the point I'm trying to make. So let them make it. And that's the goal. So, types of questions. Your next handout Oh, actually, I want to illustrate it first. I changed my plan here. I'm going to teach you James 1, 2 through 4 without making one single statement. I'm going to ask questions and kind of note how this works. I just want you to answer the questions in your mind for the sake of time, but to see how the sort of discovering learning process feels and how it can be done. So my first question is, would you please read James 1, 2 through 4? Of course, most everybody is very familiar with this passage, but have it in your minds as you, in your minds, answer my questions. So, according to this passage, why should you be happy when things go wrong? So how would you answer that? What phrase in verse 3 is a synonym for the word trials in verse 2? Everybody got that? If you heard someone preach a powerful sermon on the sovereignty of God and the authority of Scripture, and then see them blow up at the news that some drunk teenager just totaled their car in a parking lot, would you think they really believed the sermon that they just heard? Let's see how the discussion would go on that. How is a trial or event a test of their faith in that situation? What scriptures are they not believing? And then the group can say Romans 8:28, Philippians 4, Matthew, whatever it is, 5 or 6. Don't worry, not all that. So you bring that to bear. What is one practical trial that's not overtly spiritual that you are currently facing in life? What promise or characteristic about God that you hold to be true is being tested in that trial? So you can hopefully see how that would work. Would you say that your reaction to this problem reflects on your beliefs about God? Which is exactly what we talked about in the earlier session. So what is being tested or revealed ultimately in all the trials of life? Or instead you could say, do you think it's fair to say for the Christian that all problems are ultimately spiritual? We have problems with jobs and all these other things, and tests of faith. How do you build endurance in the physical realm? What's the name for that? The resistance or something?
Resistance training?
Yeah, is that the name for it? Think about how you get stronger physically. How would this principle apply in the spiritual realm? Trials do build endurance. It's not until you have to have it that you do that. How can trials result in being perfect and complete, lacking in nothing, when they usually involve giving up something desirable? How would you summarize the message of James 1, 2 through 4? How is James 1, 2 through 4 different from the world's perspective on problems? Why do you think James 1, 2 through 4 is so difficult to apply? And then here's some more application questions. If you could eliminate all the problems in your life, would you? Why or why not? In your heart of hearts, what kind of person do you want to become? What do you think it will take for you to get there? what's the most difficult thing from your past to apply this to, from the present to apply this through? And then you'll see number 7 there. How do you want to respond to this passage personally right now? So you might have a writing exercise or prayer time, or things like that, for the rest of the week. And here are some kind of opinion questions at the end. It says, count it all joy. Do you consider joy an emotion? And you can spend a lot of time on that. It probably wouldn't be that worthwhile. But it's worth talking about. What does that mean? Do you think the author really meant, you should feel joy over trials? Yes, I do. If you understood and wanted to be like Christ, you would welcome them. You really would. Some of them I'm able to do that with. Do you think a non-Christian, this is a potentially kind of a gotcha question, I don't like this too well, but who followed you around last week would say you believe about God in relation to what you believe about God in your relation to your personal needs, by your reactions. What would God say you believe based on your reaction? Okay, so do you see how I feel like I taught you James 1, 2 through 4 without ever saying a sentence. All I did was ask questions. And you wouldn't necessarily do that in a small group, but you can see how everything you want to do is there through questions because you have the scriptures. So you get into the text and let them figure it out. What is it saying? They're intelligent people. They can do that. And if there's something you want to make that's not in the text, take them to another passage. And it is just so much more effective if you can come at it from that way. Okay, so back in your handout, types of questions, to kind of think back as to what we just did. I used several types of these questions as we went. The first one is rhetorical questions, and they are throughout the Bible and are very, very effective and time-saving and efficient. So the reason they are good is because they do encourage active listening and make people think. I thought Jim's example of asking, which is also a critical thinking question too, when he said we're told we're supposed to be encouraging one another, how can we be encouraging one another if we're not engaged in each other's lives? With a nice pause afterwards, by the way. That was just a very effective way to make us think and own the answer, figure it out for ourselves. And I did that. Wouldn't you like to feel joy over someone saying you learned? Wouldn't you like to, that made you think, rather than if I were just telling you that, it wouldn't be as effective a thing. It's a good substitute for interaction in a large group. And a lot of the small groups and everybody's there are large. Last week I spoke to over 100 women. I don't do that very often. At this little thing down at Laterno, and it was very frustrating to me because I like small groups and interaction. But I wanted to make a point. I told the story of H.G. Spafford. Lost his 4-year-old son to scarlet fever, lost his entire real estate business to the Chicago fire, and then, as most people know, his 4 daughters were lost at sea on the way to the missionaries in Israel. And so what I did with the group is said, how do you recover from the loss of 5 children? What would come to your mind in dealing with that? So you can see, hopefully, people think, and they think, I'm not sure. And then I said, well, here's what came to H.G. Spafford's mind, one of my heroes. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control that Christ has regarded my helpless estate and has shed his own blood for my soul. If he died for your sins, is anything too much for him to ask? That's the only thing that can get us through the real blows and tragedies of life. And so I felt like I kind of interacted even though I was talking the whole time. And even in a small group setting, you can cover a lot using these questions, making people think without getting into a 20-minute discussion if you have too talkative of a group. And it gives a listener the ownership of the point. So another type of question that's very effective is close-ended questions. They have a 1 or 2 word answer. So they are shutting down discussion, actually. But that's where you have the control and you save the time. So like in my asking you, do you have a fellowship group or a Bible study? 1 word answer, but it gave me a good sense for the whole room. When I had introductions for the evangelism class, we only had 40 minutes, we had 16 people. If we had regular introductions, it would have taken 20 minutes or more. So I just had them go around the room and say, on a scale from 1 to 10, what's your fear level of evangelism? And it worked so well. Because everybody said, except for Chad, everybody said 8, 10, 13, whatever. And there was this wonderful sense of rapport. Oh, good, everybody else is scared too. And, it's really carried us through the class, but it didn't take, much time at all. I do the same thing with prayer. How's your prayer life? Scale of 1, nothing, you're mad at God. 10, everything's just, can't wait to have your hour of quiet time. And everybody usually ends at 5 somewhere. And then I read Revelation and you're lukewarm, and guess what? That's not good enough, but it's good. The close-ended questions are really very good. And getting people to move is also good. So like when I used to do a lot of Kodak layoffs back when they still had employees, I would start every class with, okay, show of hands. How many of you have been here more than 5 years? Every hand goes up. 10, hands all stay up. 15, all stay up. 20. Usually the whole class, which were about this size, had been there 20, 25, 30 years, and they lost their job. And so that quickly created rapport and understanding within the class, gave me a chance to express how hard that must be, wow, and all of that very quickly. So getting people to move, even kind of if you don't like the setting, move the chairs, whatever, is really very good for some reason. Critical thinking questions. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Not that they need to be the most questions that you ask, but they're the most difficult to come up with. So I want to focus on those versus personal questions and some of the others that are a little bit more obvious. The benefits of a critical thinking question. It teaches people how to study and think. And I think the greatest compliment I've ever gotten as a small group leader, as I taught us a Campus Crusade Bible study in Fort Worth, and at the end, as the school year ended, a couple of people said, "You really taught us how to study." And I was like, "I did?" I don't feel like I know how to study. But through doing the interactive approach, they felt like they learned how to look at it, approach a passage, which is what we really want to do. It facilitates true discovery learning. You want people thinking and figuring it out, doing the analysis and problem solving, and that's what that'll do. It therefore deepens their comprehension. It raises the comprehension and then the retention of it. They'll remember it longer too. They'll understand it better, remember it better, increases the odds of application. And one thing I didn't put here, cover a little bit more actually, is it combats a postmodern view of truth. The nature of truth is a dichotomy, truth, falsehood. There's a right answer to critical thinking questions. We're not getting at what does this mean to you, as Reed likes to say. We're trying to get at what does this mean? What did it mean to a first century reader? And it's hard for people to even understand that's what you're after. You've really got to train them by saying, look at the text. The answer's in the text. because they'll give you their opinions rather than even think about what the actual text says. So we're going to spend a lot of time on critical thinking questions. Opinion questions, they're good icebreakers. They get people to participate. They are empowering. People like giving their opinion. But in a study of God's Word, I sort of feel like, so what? You know, that's your opinion. I fear that a lot of leaders ask mainly opinion questions. And I would say avoid those unless you're really trying to generate participation and warmth and things like that. Of course, sometimes you can get a lot of wisdom through those questions too, but I think they're overused. To me, they're kind of like candy. You know, they're fun at the time, but when the study's over, you don't feel too good. It's kind of like, what did we really achieve with that? So you want to watch reverting to those more than you should. Application questions, I'll have some examples of that a little bit later, but that's your point, application. So you want to lead people through thinking about how they're going to change, visualizing that. And then speculative questions. Scripture speaks to that. 2 Timothy 2:14. Remind them of these things and solemnly charge them in the presence of God. So he is serious about this topic. Not to wrangle about words. Why? Because it is useless and leads to the ruin of the hearers. This is something you have to biblically shut down. You have been solemnly charged not to go off on speculative questions. I think if you tried to engage Paul in the whole superlapsarianism debate, he wouldn't bother explaining what that is. I think he would think that was ridiculous. It's so totally speculative. So, and once you kind of train your group in that, then they'll self-regulate on not getting off on those topics. The two things are, I remember as my young life leader days, 1980s, early 80s, we were coming up to this juicy, controversial verse, and I was like, I can't wait to see what Ray does with this or whatever. And he just said, there's so many things in the Bible that I do understand that I'm not applying yet. I'm not even going to take any time on this. And he skipped it. And I was like ready for this, lively discussion over it. And that really stuck with me and taught me something. And then there was a very kind of nationally connected elder in our church, hanging around with RC and Boyce and all those people. And somebody tried to engage him on the whole sovereignty, free will business. And his response was, theologians haven't figured that out in the last 2,000 years. I don't think I'm going to either. And he just, next, why go down there, around that track another time? And so you really got to be careful. We are trying to teach the Word of God. You don't think there is spiritual warfare involved in that? And I think of the C.S. Lewis quote, why tempt them with murder when cards will do? Let's just stick on all the speculative stuff. And he's won the game. So there's my soapbox on that. But I really, it's so tempting to go down that road because it's good and lively, and some theological type people like to do that. So types of questions. And then I think next is why use questions to convey content. Is that next in your thing?
Yep.
I taught a presentation skills class from a company that based it on neurological research. Jesus knew the neurological research back 2,000 years ago. Were you going to have a question?
Real quick, do you talk about the personal type of question? Or
did I skip it? Personal. Oh, yes, I did. Sorry, number 6 on the list. I just skipped it. Leads to valuable insight. Remember when I asked what person do you want to be in the James thing? Can you see how those questions bring things to your consciousness that wouldn't have come had you not led you to ask that question to yourself? So they lead to valuable insight. They help people to get to know each other. One thing that you want to have happen is for everybody to have a more intimate relationship. Well, they can't have that unless they're sharing about what's going on in their life, what they're struggling with, etc. And it provides an opportunity for ministry. So if someone's hurting and a question brings that out, you know, what are you anxious about or whatever, you have a chance to stop and pray for them or jettison your lesson and deal with that person if you need to. Thanks for pointing that out, Jim. So I taught this presentation skills class. It was based on the neurological research. And this is so true. After teaching this class for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, I really believe in this page right here. People have very poor memories. If you look at the retention statistics, I mean, people remember like 5% of something they've heard the next day and basically nothing, you know, a month later. I mean, can you tell me what sermon was a month ago and what you got out of it? You really don't retain very much of all these wonderful points. I kiddingly tell Reed sometimes, that was the best 2 sermons I've heard in a long time. Because he's got so much content there, I fear that people can't grasp it all.
Was that encouraging?
It was encouraging to her.
Reed is fun because he's so good. I can tease him. I usually send him off with, don't screw it up. Because I know he's probably going to hit a home run. This is kind of a funny story. Because I teach presentation skills, and when we met, I had never heard him preach, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do if I want to tell him he needs to use more pauses or gestures or whatever. And then I saw he is, you know, one of the best communicators I've ever seen. Truly, from a delivery standpoint, almost perfect, I would say. And he did that through practice. It's not that he was born with a gift. He watched himself. The adult learning cycle. He analyzed it, he changed, and that repetition is what made him such a great example of that. Okay, so where were we? People think in pictures, and this is why Jesus told so many parables, and there's picturesque language and narrative all throughout the Bible. People are impacted and act on emotion, not impersonal facts. And that is really a result of the Reformation taking at the same time as the Renaissance. And we've taken the emotion and the personal aspect and gotten very doctrinally oriented. And it's not a biblical way of, that's modernity. And now we're in post-modernity. What communicates better than the picture of God the Father running to meet the prodigal son? You can't get there through saying God is so loving, blah, blah, blah. You know, you've got to create those pictures that will stick in people's mind. I remember reading one time the favorite passage of the Bible was in a survey, Psalm 23, that simple picture of the shepherd. That is what we want to take advantage of. People are incited to sin when they are told what to do or not do. So if we're telling rather than asking and leading people to their own convictions, then we're inflaming their desire to go against us, according to Romans 7. The power of sin is the law. So it's not motivating the people to be told. And Jesus did it. So it's good enough for me. I'm not sure exactly why in every way, but he asked questions, surprising examples of that. You can go through all 4 Gospels of a red letter edition with a question in one sitting. And so I'll do that every once in a while. How did Jesus respond to this type of person? And you really see trends. It's very interesting to do that. So, in conclusion, people are most apt to remember, comprehend, and therefore apply information they see or derive for themselves in an emotional, visual context. And so critical thinking questions are just so powerful. And I don't want to take a lot of time on this too, but your next thing is your examples of questions, and these are just some examples from Scripture. The first one is discovery learning or critical thinking, which can be rhetorical, like we talked about, or actual. But look at the second one down. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? How efficient is that? How smart is that? I mean, that is just so to the point. Who regards you as superior? What do you have that you did not receive? And I like with rhetorical questions, go ahead and answer them. What do I have that I didn't receive? Well, my good looks came from my parents. My brains came from my parents, and I have that. My education came from other people. I don't have anything that I can take real credit for. That's such a good question to ponder. And if you received it, then why are you boasting? Good question. Isn't that just so good? And then what can we say to these things? Here's Paul saying, think about this. What can you say to this? If God is for us, who is against us? Much more effective way to get that message across. And then skipping on down to facilitate self-awareness. I think this is so interesting. Jesus saw a person lying there on the road, and he knew they had already been there a long time. So why was that fact put in there? And he said to them, do you wish to get well? He knew the answer to that, but he turned it into a conversation rather than just launching in to that. To request information, including a personal opinion. And this whole exchange where Jesus said, who do people, the furthest, say that I am? And I have another place where I'll talk about, start with the least threatening first and work your way down. And then who do you say that I am? And that whole interchange. The point was, I'm Christ, I'm the Messiah. He just didn't tell them that. He had a conversation with them to make that point, and so much more effective. And then to expose or to shame, I don't know that that would be quite unusual for us to, well, actually in a counseling situation, it's called processing the here and now. It is a way to go. But think about it, when Jesus, they came to the garden to arrest him, and he said, why are you doing this now at night? You could have gotten me any time when I was speaking. He's getting in their way. He's making them admit to themselves all these things. Was it going to work? Did they say, oh yeah, you're right? No, we just made him probably beat him a little bit harder. But he was still ministering, still trying, and it was so effective. And then the hypothetical, controversial, and answerable. If you want to go back and take a look at those, Jesus did use those to kind of stump people. So, critical thinking questions. Sorry, didn't do that. What is critical thinking? And I just found this definition online. It is more than understanding something. If you're thinking critically, it involves evaluation, critiquing, and a depth of knowledge. And that's what we want to teach people how to do. It requires problem solving, creativity, rationalization, and a refusal to accept things at face value. So it's just that deeper kind of comprehension and understanding. And critical thinking questions, as I've already said, help people to engage in the critical thinking. The important thing to remember is they have a right answer. You're looking for something that is true and helping them figure it out. So it requires analysis to figure out the right answer. It implicitly teaches that biblical view of truth. There's meaning in the text, and there's a right answer, only one interpretation, many applications. And people really have strayed away from that understanding. It's about what the Holy Spirit tells me it means, or what I believe it means, not what did it mean, again, to the first century reader and things like that. Results in that depth of understanding, confidence in the content when you've seen it for yourself, and greater retention of that content. So what I want to do is go through another exercise where we're going to talk and teach you Hebrews 11:1a. And I'm watching our time here. I've forgotten. What time are we supposed to finish?
12:15.
Okay. Really? 11:15. You mean, yeah, we've already, yeah, we had 40 minutes and then an hour. I want to kind of,
11:15,
yeah, so we're already over our 40, but I should have said something, I'm planning that. And we'll take a little break and then we'll have a shorter session at the end. We'll probably not be able to do some of the exercises. And I'm going to hurry through this and help you more than I would a group. This is kind of a condensation of 4 weeks of discussion. But I would want you to, again, think about how hard I'm making you work and note things as you go, because we're going to analyze it at the end. And this is a difficult passage, I think, and so it may blow up. We'll just see what happens, okay? So, Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. I remember reading that and thinking, what is that? I can't have that today. You know, I really don't know what that means. And so what I did was think about Romans 4, which is all about justification by faith, and ends with the example of Abraham and how he believed God, it was reckoned to him as righteousness. So, what's the phrase? Interpret obscure passages by the lesser obscure passages. So I'm going to try to understand faith through looking at Abraham's example. So here it is, Romans 4. As it was spoken, so your descendants shall be. God promised him he's going to have descendants as numerous as the stars, or whatever it is. But without becoming weak in faith, he contemplated his own body. He looked at the circumstances around him by sight, by empirical means, which was as good as dead. So how's he going to have children if he's 100 years old and way past that? And Sarah, who was also the deadness of her womb. So he's looking at a situation. God told me I'm going to have kids. Circumstances say that I'm not. And what did he do? Love this passage. With respect to the promise of God, he did not waver in unbelief, but grew strong in faith, giving glory to God. And I love this, being fully assured that what God had promised, he was able also to perform. So, I would, and then I know this is about faith because of the context. The next verse is, therefore, because he did that, he was reckoned as righteousness. So that is what faith is. You could replace, he had assurance of things hoped for that word faith in there. So, but assurance of things hoped for. That word hope is very confusing. When you think about the normal usage of the word hope, I hope it doesn't rain on my wedding day. That is filled with doubt, is it not? That normal usage of hope. And yet here we find other passages with the word hope in it to see if that's what it means. So this passage is another one that's really hard to figure out, but it's really rewarding when you feel like you have figured it out. So in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen, conviction of things not seen, second part of Hebrews 1, is not hope. For who hopes for what he already sees? I mean, doesn't that just kind of like make your head explode? So here, because of the sake of time too, this is the way I would go if nobody knows how to figure that one out. Do you believe I made it today? Are you hoping that I will make it? How can you hope for what you've already seen? You see me here. So it's nonsense to say, I hope Sky makes it. I'm here, you can see me. Do you believe there is a heaven?
Yes.
Are you hoping still that there is a heaven? Do you have hope? Is your hope in that? Why is that real hope? You haven't seen it yet. We won't have to have faith in heaven. We'll be there. We'll see it. And so until, when you're in that interim period of not seeing it yet, or not being able to see something is true that's in Scripture, that is hope. H.G. Spafford hoped in the love of God in Romans 8:28 in the face of the loss of 5 children. That took a lot of faith, did it not? So, and here's a good question, but if we hope for what we do not see, the perseverance, we wait eagerly. So there's that gap there. So what is biblical hope? Which is what Abraham had. And how about answering this? Was he hoping like, oh gee, I hope this is all true, the way we normally use it? Or say that again, Jim?
He was hoping for a son.
Yeah. Or did he have any doubt? No. Think about, in the Hebrews 11, sacrificing Isaac after he's supposed to have all these descendants. God said it. I don't see how it's going to be, but I'm acting on believing God's promise. And I thought about saying, just as an example of facilitation, if I'd said, what is biblical hope, and I put it in all caps, being fully assured, would you have been a little insulted by that? It's like, I can find it myself. You've got to really decide the questions. How much do you set them up for people to know the answer without giving it away? So anyway, I thought about that. Maybe I should have used it.
I thought this was the definition for biblical faith.
It is. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for.
Right.
So how does that apply to Abraham believing promises? They don't seem to connect. So we've got to take the words apart.
I see. So you're saying that so if I think about faith as the assurance of things hoped for, then can I have hope that doesn't have assurance? Because hope and assurance equal faith. Can I have a hope that doesn't have assurance?
Not being real faith. He was fully assured. He had no doubt. And let me get to the next slide, because that's where the confusion is. And I think that's where the confusion happens when you've got these whiteboards full of all these prayer requests and you don't think are probably going to be answered. So how do you have faith in that situation? So getting back to the key. What did Abraham believe in? According to Romans 4.
The promise of God.
The promises of God. So, what is a promise? We could have a discussion, about that. Here's the dictionary definition. It's a declaration or assurance that one will do. Here's that future piece. A particular thing will happen. So God has made us certain promises. And so can you have biblical faith in the absence of a promise? Can you be fully assured something's going to happen? God never promised you it was?
No.
What does assurance of things hoped for mean? God's going to keep his promises. It's very simple. There's no mystical, experiential piece to it. The Bible says this. I either got to believe it and base my life on it or not. And if I don't have faith. It's really simple. And I want to give you, if you want it, the handout that I gave my group, which half the people didn't even bother to pick up, on the promises that you should be having faith in every trial. What is it you can have rock solid faith in? You don't know your child's going to be healed or come back or any of that stuff. So how do you have faith? You believe that God loves me, Jesus died for me, this life is a vapor, I'll be rewarded for my faith, my needs are met, trials are for my good. I must lose my life to find it. Whenever I sin, grace abounds, and Jesus may come back. So this, I just thought I'd share these handouts with you if you'd like to
Great
have them.
tool for speaking the gospel.
There you go.
Another-
Oh yeah, these are the promises you can take to the bank. And then there's some prayer exercises, books to recommend, and something else in there. Oh yes, a prayer outline that changed my life in 1980s that somebody handed me in a small group meeting. Okay, do we need to take a break? We've gone way over, but let me see. Let's go ahead and do the critique, and then we'll take a break. So,
Stein,
yes.
as far as, but, you know, Abraham, what else did he have? He only had the word. He didn't have the word.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, this is very good point. Subjective communication with God, which I don't think is happening in the New Testament. Thank you for pointing that out. So an honest critique. I'm pretty thick-skinned. Feel free to really think about, just having been through that experience, in what ways is this type of approach effective? Okay. As you went through it, having to struggle to answer the questions.
I think one thing I like about it is like faith and hope are words that get used in a lot of everyday language, and they have their own meanings, but they're kind of vague, or maybe there's multiple meanings, and so it kind of forces us to like think through terms that we might just take for granted, or we might just use, but almost in kind of a empty way, without like real kind of power or substance. Yeah, just kind of in a generic way, without the real biblical kind of power in those words.
Right. Well, that's the objective I had, so that's good. I love that term, forced me to think.
Every once in a while, I'll listen to a podcast called Freakonomics, and their tagline is the hidden side of everything. And it's like you're saying, there's kind of the common words, but it's kind of, we're uncovering the hidden side of what's behind those, and it's kind of like a discovery process. It's very gratifying, very satisfying.
It really is. Yeah.
By kind of atomizing it, you broke it into bite-sized pieces so that you can kind of chew on the individual things and pull it together.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good, and that's what I'm saying, in the approach, what was effective?
Yeah.
Getting it down to manageable things. In what ways was it ineffective? And the next question is, would you have preferred to have me just explain it or someone else? Or did you like doing it through discovery learning? Was it too complicated?
It felt a little circuitous, like you're like, okay, where are we headed here?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to, again, this is like a 4-week study, and I'm thinking, okay, where are the main kernels I want to get? So you've got to choose when people are capable and doing that.
Yeah.
And it can be confusing, and it takes a whole lot more time.
If you had a group that was not responsive and interactive, that would be very painful. But if you had a group that did a lot of give and take, that would flow very nicely.
Yeah, and that's where, like, I'll prepare, if they're stumped, what am I going to say? How am I going to rephrase the question and give them a big hint or something else? And that's what I did with the verse, what does it mean? How can you hope for what you do not see? And that usually, people don't know what that means, And so then I'll say, can you hope that I'm here when you see me? And then they get it. So you do have to do a lot of preparation to use this technique. Okay, why don't we take, it is 35 after, how about a little 5-minute break, 4-minute break, and then we'll wrap it up.